The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Aurelian Hotel restaurant scatter light like broken promises across white linen and upturned faces. A homeless girl in a second-hand dress kneels beside a wheelchair where a paralyzed matriarch sits frozen, breath caught between one heartbeat and the next. 5 notes of a forgotten lullaby slip into the silence. Forks pause midair. Conversations die. And Steven Berger, immaculate in his black suit, feared on every block from here to the East River, realizes a stranger with sun-cracked lips and charcoal-stained fingers just calmed the only person in the world he cannot control. Heather Fuller had been invisible for 3 weeks, and she intended to stay that way. She adjusted the thrift store dress for the 3rd time that evening, her hands trembling slightly, not from the November cold that still clung to her bones, but from the familiar weight of hiding who she really was. At 23, Heather had perfected the art of disappearing, moving through the Grand Aurelian's marble lobby like smoke, timing her presence with the dessert course when security grew lazy and the staff were too busy to notice one more shadow near the restrooms. The abandoned delivery van behind the hotel had been her bedroom for 21 nights now. She'd counted each one in the margins of her sketchbook, small tick marks that reminded her she was still here, still breathing, still one step ahead of the shelters where questions got asked and names got recorded. Table 9 looks restless, a server muttered, rushing past with a tray of champagne flutes that cost more than Heather made in a month of sketching tourists in the park. Not that she made much. $5 for a face. 10 if they liked the way she captured their eyes. Heather nodded reflexively, though no one had been speaking to her. She pressed herself against the wall near the restroom corridor, sketchbook clutched like a shield, and let her gaze drift across the dining room. Mapping. Always mapping. Hands, shoulders, the way power sits in a spine or hides behind a wine glass. She'd learned to read rooms in the rehab ward where her mother had died, where nurses moved with purpose and orderlies moved with something else entirely. Then the atmosphere shifted. Karina Kennedy arrived the way weather arrives. Everyone sensed her first, straightening in their seats, lowering their voices without knowing why. Silver-haired, elegant in dove-gray silk that probably cost more than Heather's entire existence, she sat motionless in a wheelchair pushed by a man whose face belonged on old movie posters. Dangerous and beautiful in equal measure. Steven Berger. Even Heather knew the name. You didn't sleep in alleys without learning which names meant safety and which meant run. Excuse me. The voice was sharp, commanding, with just a hint of impatience that made Heather's spine straighten automatically. You. By the restrooms. Heather's first instinct was to bolt. Her second was to freeze. She did neither, turning slowly to find a server gesturing urgently toward table 9. Mrs. Kennedy needs something's wrong. The crash of silverware hitting marble cut through the murmured conversations like a gunshot. Heather's gaze snapped to Karina Kennedy. The older woman's face had gone pale, eyes wide and fixed on nothing, chest rising in shallow, rapid gasps. Locked. Trapped inside her own body. Heather knew that look. Had seen it in her mother's face during the bad nights. Freeze. Suffocate. Fall. She moved without permission, without thought, past the linen and the murmurs and the wall that separated people like her from people like them. Her knees hit the carpet beside the wheelchair, and she took Karina's hands, cold, trembling, the way a nurse had once taken her mother's. Easy, Heather whispered, her voice rough from disuse. You're safe. Breathe with me. The lullaby slipped out before she could stop it. 5 notes her mother used to hum in the dark hours. 5 notes an orderly had taught her while stealing pills from the medicine cart, his smile clean and his hands deadly. Hush now, morning comes. Karina's fists softened. Her pulse steadied beneath Heather's fingertips. Around them, the dining room seemed to remember how to breathe, conversations bleeding back in like color returning to a photograph. Steven Berger stood frozen 3 feet away, his hand still on the wheelchair's handle, his expression unreadable except for the sharp focus in his dark eyes. Who are you? He asked quietly, and the question landed like a threat wrapped in silk. Heather didn't answer. She was already calculating the distance to the service exit, already deciding she'd be gone before anyone got her name, before security checked the cameras, before this moment could follow her into whatever came next. She was wrong. But Heather Fuller had already been running for too long to stop now. She didn't know, couldn't know, that the lullaby she'd hummed without thinking would unravel a conspiracy that reached from hospital corridors to boardrooms, from stolen pills to forged signatures. She didn't know that Karina Kennedy had been looking for her for 8 years, or that Steven Berger would spend the next 72 hours deciding whether she was a threat or a miracle. All Heather knew, standing in that chandelier-lit dining room with her heart hammering and her carefully built invisibility shattered, was that she'd just broken the only rule that mattered. And there was no taking it back. 3 weeks earlier, the rule had been simple. Before we go further, if you're enjoying this story, please like the video and subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Steven Berger didn't believe in coincidence. He stood in the alley behind the Grand Aurelian at 11 p.m., watching his head of security pull back a tarp from the delivery van's broken window. Inside, a nest of folded blankets, arranged with the kind of precision that spoke of military discipline or survival instinct. A plastic bag of toiletries hung from a bent coat hanger. 3 bottles of water, carefully rationed. And sketches. Dozens of them. Marco handed him the sketchbook through the window, his expression unreadable. "Boss, you need to see this." Steven flipped through the pages slowly. Faces. Hands. The curve of a shoulder, the angle of a watch face. Timestamps penciled in the margins with obsessive detail. November 2nd, 8:47 p.m. November 8th, 9:15 p.m. Each sketch captured not just features but tells. Nervous fingers, forced smiles, the way his own attorney had touched his collar 3 times during their last conversation. The girl wasn't just homeless. She was documenting them. "Bring her to the service entrance," Steven said quietly. "Tell her it's payment for helping my mother. And Marco, don't scare her more than necessary." 20 minutes later, Heather Fuller sat rigid at the staff table in the hotel service corridor, looking like she might bolt at any second. Her dress was clean but worn thin at the seams. Her hands, stained with charcoal, gripped the edge of the table. Steven set a plate in front of her. Risotto. The same dish his mother had complimented. "Eat," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Then you'll have 1 minute with my mother. She asked for you." Heather's eyes flicked to the exit. "I don't want trouble." "Neither do I." Steven leaned back, watching her the way he watched everyone, cataloging micro-expressions, calculating risk. "Which is why I need to know why a homeless girl has been sketching my business associates for 3 weeks. Her jaw tightened. "I sketch everyone. Faces pay." "These aren't just faces." He slid her sketchbook across the table. "These are dossiers. You've documented jewelry, watches, meeting times. Either you're extremely observant or you're working for someone." "I'm not." Heather's voice cracked. She pressed her palms flat against the table. "I'm just trying to survive. I draw what I see. That's it." Before Steven could respond, Karina's voice cut through from the doorway. "Steven, let her eat in peace." His mother wheeled herself into the corridor, her movements slow but determined. The sweet nurse hovered behind her, but Karina waved her off with one hand. "Mrs. Kennedy," Heather started, half rising. "I didn't mean to." "Sit." Karina's tone was gentle but absolute. She maneuvered her wheelchair beside Heather's chair, not across from her. "Beside me? Not across like you're being interrogated." Steven watched his mother take Heather's charcoal-stained hand without hesitation, and something in his chest tightened. Karina hadn't initiated touch with a stranger in months, not since the accident, not since the paralysis made her feel fragile. "You remember St. Luke's Clinic?" Karina asked Heather softly. "You used to sit in the waiting room and draw flowers on the window with your finger. Your mother would apologize, and I would tell her to let you be. That beauty shouldn't apologize for existing." Heather's eyes glistened. "You paid for her medication. The nurse told me later. After everything, they said an anonymous donor covered it." "Not anonymous," Karina corrected. "Just private. Your mother was kind to me once when I needed kindness. I simply returned it." Stephen's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. Your mother's attorney. Urgent. Family stability measures. He looked up to find Karina watching him, her expression suddenly guarded. Stephen, his mother said quietly, her hand still holding Heather's, strength deserves a seat at the table. Remember that. The message on his phone felt heavier now. Deliberate. I'll be back, Stephen said, standing. He met Heather's gaze for a brief moment. Stay. Please. It wasn't a request. But it also wasn't a threat. As he walked toward the private office, Stephen Berger realized with uncomfortable certainty that the homeless girl with the sketchbook had just become the most dangerous variable in a game he didn't yet understand. Heather had never been inside a hotel suite that cost more per night than she'd earned in 6 months. Karina's rooms at the Grand Aurelian were all cream silk and soft lighting, the kind of space designed to make you forget the world outside existed. She wished she could forget why she was here. The attorney, Harold Vance, silver-haired and precise, sat across from Karina with a leather portfolio open on the coffee table. Stephen stood by the window, his posture rigid, while Heather perched on the edge of a chair she'd been reluctantly invited to occupy. It's merely a precaution, Vance was saying, his tone smooth as expensive scotch. Given your condition, Mrs. Kennedy, this medical directive ensures your assets are managed appropriately during your recovery period. Heather watched Karina's face tighten almost imperceptibly. I'm paralyzed, Karina said quietly. Not incapacitated. Of course not. Vance smiled. But the board has expressed concerns about decision-making capacity during periods of medical stress. This simply transfers temporary control to a management trust until you've regained full competency. The word hung in the air like poison. Stephen's jaw clenched. My mother is perfectly competent. I'm not questioning that. Vance slid the document across the table. I'm protecting her. And you. Sign here, Mrs. Kennedy, and we can put this matter to rest. Karina reached for the pen, her hand trembling slightly. Heather's eyes caught on the signature line. Something was wrong. Wait. The word escaped before Heather could stop it. 3 faces turned toward her. Sorry, can I see that? Vance's smile cooled. This is a private family matter, miss. Fuller, Heather supplied, already leaning forward. Her artist's eye tracked the slant of the signature on the document, the pressure points, the way the K curved. Mrs. Kennedy, did you write this? Karina frowned, studying the paper more closely. I think so. Last week, Harold said he needed my authorization for. She paused. I don't remember signing this particular document. You were tired, Vance interjected smoothly. After your physical therapy session. You authorized several items that afternoon. Heather pulled her sketchbook from her bag. Stephen had returned it an hour ago and flipped to a page from 5 days prior. A quick study of Karina's hand, writing a thank you note to the hotel staff. The timestamp read 3:47 p.m. This is your handwriting, Heather said, pointing. Look at the angle. You slant left when you're relaxed, about 15 degrees. But this signature, she indicated the directive, slants right. And the pressure is different. Heavier on the upstrokes. Silence filled the room like a held breath. That's absurd, Vance said. You're basing legal analysis on sketches? I'm basing it on observation. Heather met his gaze. I've drawn Mrs. Kennedy's hands 4 times this week. I know how she writes. Stephen moved closer, studying both documents. His expression was unreadable, but something sharp flickered in his eyes. She's right. The slant is wrong. Karina's voice was barely a whisper. Harold, what is this? A misunderstanding. Vance gathered the papers quickly, too quickly. Obviously, we'll need to verify. His phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a photo wallpaper. 2 men at a charity gala, champagne glasses raised. Heather's blood turned to ice. She knew that face. The one on the left. Kind smile, clean-shaven, wearing a medical orderly's uniform in her memory, but a tuxedo in the photo. Mr. Ellis. The man who'd taught her the lullaby while stealing her mother's pain medication. The man who'd been so gentle, so helpful, so present during the worst months of Heather's life. The caption beneath read, Harold Vance and Elias Morrow, Annual Guardianship Foundation Gala. Who is Elias Morrow? Heather asked, her voice barely steady. Vance's face went carefully blank. A colleague. Why? But Heather was already looking at Stephen, seeing the same calculation in his eyes that she felt in her gut. This wasn't just a forged signature. This was something much, much worse. The hotel business center smelled like leather and expensive coffee. Heather sat in front of a computer terminal, her hands shaking as she typed Elias Morrow Guardianship into the search bar. Stephen stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off him. Karina was resting upstairs with her nurse, still shaken from the attorney's abrupt departure. Tell me about Mr. Ellis, Stephen said quietly. Heather's fingers paused on the keyboard. The memories came back sharp and unwanted, fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant, her mother's labored breathing in the bed by the window. St. Luke's rehab ward. 8 years ago. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. My mother was recovering from surgery. Complications. They had her on a pain management protocol. She pulled up a photo from the gala. Elias Morrow's face filled the screen, older but unmistakable. He was an orderly, always kind, always there during the hard nights. And the lullaby? He taught it to me. Heather's throat tightened. Said his grandmother used to sing it in Naples. That it would help my mother rest. She clicked to another search result, a non-profit called the Guardianship Foundation. Elias Morrow, listed as Director of Senior Care Initiatives. What he didn't tell me was that he was stealing her medication, replacing it with placebos. I found out later, after she couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Stephen leaned over her shoulder, his finger tapping the screen. There. Vance is on the board. And look at the donor list. Heather scrolled. Names she recognized from her sketches. Businessmen who'd sat near Karina's table. The woman with the nervous tell who touched her necklace. All listed as benefactors to guardianship trusts that, according to a buried news article, had been investigated twice for elder exploitation. They strip people, Heather whispered, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. Get them declared incompetent. Take control of their assets through these trusts. Then they disappear into care facilities while their money gets funneled through shell companies. Stephen's voice was cold, controlled, but his hands had curled into fists. My mother was next. A knock at the door made them both turn. Marco, Stephen's head of security, entered with a manila envelope. Boss, you asked for the accident file from 18 months ago. Stephen took the envelope, spreading the contents across the desk. Police photos of Karina's car, wrapped around a guardrail on a mountain road. The official report cited a tire blowout, but Marco pointed to a series of close-up shots. The driver found these in storage. Never made it into the official report. Someone must have missed them during evidence collection. Tiny metal fragments. Circuitry. What looked like part of a small rotor. Drone parts, Stephen said flatly. Heather felt sick. They didn't want her dead. Just incapacitated. Stephen's jaw clenched. Easier to control. The directive was probably drafted before her car even left the road. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something dangerous flashed across his face. What is it? Heather asked. Stephen turned the phone toward her. A formal invitation from Bram Garrison, his lieutenant, time-stamped 10 minutes ago. Peace dinner tonight. Grand Aurelian Restaurant. 8 p.m. Time to discuss the family's future. Your mother's attendance required. Below the text was a photo of the same chandelier-lit dining room where Heather had first hummed the lullaby. Where this had all started. It's a trap, Heather said. Obviously. Stephen pocketed his phone. Which is why we're going to walk straight into it. He met her eyes, and Heather saw something she hadn't expected. Not suspicion, but a grim kind of partnership. You still have that sketchbook? He asked. Heather nodded, her heart hammering. Good. Stephen's smile was sharp as a blade. Tonight, we're going to show them exactly what a homeless girl with a pencil can do. Stephen Berger had built his reputation on reading rooms before he entered them. Tonight, He was walking into his own restaurant knowing the exits were compromised and the guest list was a battlefield map. He stood in the Grand Aurelian's lobby at 6:45 p.m., watching his mother argue with him in the way only Karina Kennedy could, quietly, precisely, and with absolute finality. "Heather stays with me," Karina said, her wheelchair positioned between Stephen and the elevator. "Not in the back. Not hidden. Beside me." "Mother, that makes her a target." "She already is a target." Karina's voice was steel wrapped in silk. The moment she noticed that signature, the moment she recognized Elias, she became part of this. Hiding her now would be cowardice, and it would be ineffective. Stephen glanced at Heather, who stood 3 feet away looking like she wanted to melt into the marble floor. She'd changed into a simple black dress, one of the hotel boutique's donations, but she still held her sketchbook like a weapon. "A companion pass puts her on record," Stephen said carefully. "Makes her visible to everyone in that room." "Exactly." Karina's gaze didn't waver. "Strength deserves a seat at the table, Stephen."
"You taught me that."
Or did you only mean it when the strength was yours? The barb landed precisely where his mother intended. Stephen exhaled slowly, then nodded to Marco. "Register Miss Fuller as Mrs. Kennedy's personal companion. Suite access, dining privileges, full security clearance." Heather's eyes widened. "I don't need." "Yes, you do." Karina reached for her hand. "And I owe you far more than a hotel room and a meal. This is the smallest payment I can offer." Stephen pulled out his phone while Karina and Heather moved toward the restaurant entrance. He scrolled through his contacts, found the number he needed, and typed quickly. "Aisha Cole, civil rights attorney, DOJ special counsel. If you're tracking guardianship fraud patterns, I have evidence you'll want to see. Grand Aurelian Restaurant, 8 p.m. Come as my guest. SB." He hit send before he could second-guess the decision. Aisha was dangerous in the best way, relentless, principled, and impossible to intimidate. If the directive scheme was part of a larger pattern, she'd already have files. And if Bram and Vance saw a federal attorney at the table, they'd know the game had changed. His phone buzzed immediately. "I'll be there." "And Stephen, I've been waiting for someone with your resources to finally grow a conscience." Stephen pocketed the phone with a grim smile. In a quiet corner of the restaurant's prep area, Heather spread her sketchbook across a service table. Stephen watched her work, cataloging pages with the same precision she'd used to document his world for 3 weeks. "November 3rd, Heather murmured, tapping a sketch of a man's hand. "Vance was here, with Elias. See the cufflink? Custom design. It's in 3 other sketches, always at tables near your mother." She flipped forward. "November 9th. This woman, she touched her necklace 4 times when Vance mentioned asset management. Classic tell." "You remember all of this?"
Stephen asked.
"I remember everything I draw." Heather's finger traced the timestamp on another page. "It's how I survived. Notice patterns. Remember faces. Know who to avoid." Stephen studied the sketches with new appreciation. This wasn't just art. It was intelligence gathering by someone who'd learned to weaponize observation. "Miss Fuller," he said quietly, "you're wasted on street corners." Heather looked up, something between fear and defiance in her eyes. "I'm not looking for a job, Mr. Berger." "Good. Because I'm not offering one." Stephen straightened his cuffs. "I'm offering partnership. For tonight, at least." Before Heather could respond, Antoine, the maitre d', appeared at Stephen's elbow. His expression was carefully neutral, but his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Monsieur Berger. A word." They stepped aside. Antoine's eyes flicked toward the restaurant entrance. "Mr. Garrison arrived 20 minutes early. He's posted additional security at both exits. Not hotel personnel, his own men. And he's requested the private dining section be closed to other guests." Stephen's blood went cold. "He's boxing us in." "It would appear so, sir." Stephen glanced back at Heather, then at his mother being settled at their usual table by the window. The chandeliers cast dancing shadows across white linen, beautiful and treacherous. "Antoine," Stephen said quietly, How many exits does this restaurant really have? The maitre d's smile was ghost thin. 3 that Mr. Garrison knows about, monsieur. For that he doesn't. Show Miss Fuller the 4th.
Now.
Of course, sir. Antoine hesitated. And the federal attorney, who just arrived. Shall I seat her with your party? Stephen turned to see Aisha Cole entering the lobby. Dark suit, measured stride, and a leather bag that probably contained enough legal ammunition to level a city block. Front and center, Stephen said. Let's make sure everyone sees her. Tonight, he thought, either they'd expose the whole rotten conspiracy, or they'd all go down together under crystal chandeliers and the weight of beautiful eyes. The chandeliers seemed brighter tonight, Heather thought. Or maybe it was just that she'd never sat beneath them before, always watched from the shadows, never part of the light. She sat beside Karina at table 9, the same table where this had all started. Stephen was across from them, his posture relaxed, but his eyes tracking every movement in the room. Aisha Cole sat at the adjacent table, seemingly absorbed in her phone, but clearly listening to everything. Bram Garrison stood at the head of the table, champagne glass raised, smile wide and empty. He was younger than Stephen, hungrier, with the kind of ambition that didn't wait for permission. To family, Bram announced, his voice carrying across the dining room. And to stability during uncertain times. Other diners raised their glasses automatically. Heather noticed how many faces she recognized from her sketches, the same people who'd circled Karina's table for weeks like sharks sensing blood. Harold Vance appeared at Bram's shoulder, leather portfolio in hand. The attorney's smile was professional, practiced, sympathetic. Mrs. Kennedy, Vance began, setting papers on the table. Given recent discussions about your care and the family's future, we thought it best to formalize arrangements. For your protection, of course. The medical directive. Same document as before, same forged signature. Karina's hand tightened on her armrest. We've been through this, Harold. And we're going through it again. Bram's voice had lost its warmth. He snapped his fingers once, a sharp sound that cut through the ambient conversation. 2 men moved to the main entrance. 2 more positioned themselves at the service corridor. Not hotel security. Bram's people. The room's energy shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused above plates. People who'd spent their lives reading power dynamics suddenly realized they were witnessing something that wasn't on the menu. Heather felt her chest tighten.
Freeze.
Suffocate.
Fall.
But this time, she didn't run. She hummed. 5 notes. The same lullaby that had stopped a room once before. But now it wasn't comfort, it was a signal. A reclamation of something stolen. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was attention. Every eye turned toward Heather. Karina's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once. Stephen's gaze locked on her face, with something that looked like respect. Heather reached for her sketchbook and laid it open on the white linen, pages spreading like evidence at a crime scene. November 10th, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. 3:47 p.m. Mrs. Kennedy wrote a thank you note to the hotel staff. She pointed to her sketch. Karina's hand captured in charcoal, the gentle left slant of her writing, the timestamp clear in the corner. This is her authentic signature. She turned the page to show the directive Vance had presented. This signature slants right. Different pressure. Different rhythm. It's a forgery. This is absurd, Vance sputtered. She's basing legal determinations on sketches. On observation, Heather corrected. She flipped through more pages. November 3rd. You and Elias Morrow having dinner. November 9th. You at this table, watching Mrs. Kennedy. November 15th. You meeting with these 3 board members. She pointed to faces in the crowd. All documented. All time-stamped. All part of a pattern. Aisha Cole stood slowly, her movement deliberate. She pulled out her DOJ identification and set it on her table where everyone could see it. I'd like copies of those sketches, Aisha said calmly. For my investigation into guardianship fraud. Bram's face went red. This is family business. This is evidence, Aisha corrected. Bram lunged across the table for the sketchbook, his control finally shattering. He didn't make it. Stephen moved like violence contained in an expensive suit. He caught Bram's wrist mid-reach, folded it backward with surgical precision, and leaned in close enough that only those at the table could hear his words.
Sit. Down.
But everyone in the dining room read the message in Stephen's posture, in the way Bram's face drained of color, in the sudden stillness of the men at the exits who realized they'd been on the wrong side of the equation. Bram sat. The chandeliers cast their dancing light across the table, illuminating a sketchbook that had just become a weapon, and a homeless girl who'd just stopped a coup with nothing but a pencil and the truth. Heather saw him before he reached the table. Elias Morrow moved through the dining room with the practiced calm of someone used to entering crisis situations. He wore a gray suit instead of scrubs, but his face was the same: kind eyes, gentle smile, the expression of a man who cared deeply about helping people. She knew better now. "Mrs. Kennedy," Elias said, his voice warm with concern as he approached. "I heard there was some distress. As your medical consultant, I thought I should check." "You're not her medical consultant," Heather said, standing so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. "You're a thief." The room went silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. Predatory. Waiting. Elias's smile never wavered. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "St. Luke's rehab ward. 8 years ago." Heather's voice shook, but she held his gaze. "You taught me a lullaby while my mother was dying. You told me it would help her rest. What you didn't tell me was that you were stealing her pain medication and replacing it with placebos." "That's a very serious accusation," Elias said smoothly. He turned to Karina with practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Kennedy, this young woman seems confused. Perhaps the stress." "Antoine," Stephen called, his voice cutting through Elias's performance. The maitre d' appeared with a tablet. A moment later, the restaurant's paneled wall flickered to life, the private dining room's presentation screen that was usually reserved for wine lists and dessert menus. 2 photos appeared side by side. Left, a hospital ID badge. Mr. Ellis, orderly, St. Luke's Medical Center. The face younger, clean-shaven, wearing scrubs. Right? The gala photo. Elias Morrow, director of senior care initiatives, in a tuxedo, champagne glass raised beside Harold Vance. Same face. Different names. Same predatory smile. "The hospital fired you 9 years ago," Stephen said quietly, reading from his phone. "Investigation into medication discrepancies. No charges filed due to lack of evidence. You changed your name, got credentials in senior care management, and started the Guardianship Foundation 3 months later." Marco stepped forward, placing an evidence bag on the table. The drone fragments from Karina's accident gleamed under the chandelier light. "These were in your mother's crash file," Marco said. "Remote device. Designed for precision nudges, not destruction. Just enough force to cause an accident without killing." Elias's smile finally faltered. Karina's voice cut through the room like a blade. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. "This girl is under my protection." Every head turned toward her. Karina sat straighter in her wheelchair, silver hair catching the light, eyes fierce with the authority of someone who'd built empires and broken men who'd underestimated her. "Anyone who touches her," Karina continued, each word deliberate, "touches me." Heather felt something crack open in her chest, not fear this time, but something else. Something that felt like belonging. Half of Bram's men at the exits shifted their weight, exchanged glances. 2 of them stepped back, hands moving away from their jackets. They'd been paid to provide muscle, not to cross Karina Kennedy. The power in the room had shifted again. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Bram's smile returned, sharp and confident. "Right on schedule. I called them 20 minutes ago. Reported a theft in progress. They'll want to search everyone, starting with the homeless girl carrying stolen property." He nodded toward Heather's sketchbook. "That belongs to the hotel's art collection, doesn't it?" Easy mistake to make. Stephen's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Heather caught movement in her peripheral vision. A man in kitchen whites, one of Bram's runners, was slipping toward the service corridor, phone in hand, moving fast. "Stephen," Heather whispered urgently, pointing. But the sirens were already pulling up to the hotel entrance, and Bram was standing now, confident in his trap, certain he'd won. Elias Morrow took a step backward, calculating his exit. And in the kitchen, the runner disappeared through the service door, carrying whatever message would complete Bram's plan. The chandeliers flickered once, just a brief dimming, as if even the light knew everything was about to change. Aisha Cole had been a federal attorney long enough to recognize a setup when she saw one. Two uniformed officers entered the Grand Aurelian's dining room with the aggressive confidence of men who believed they were responding to a clear-cut crime. The older one, Sergeant Stripes, 20 years of bad coffee etched into his face, scanned the room and locked onto Heather Fuller immediately. "That's her," Bram said helpfully, pointing. "The one with the sketchbook. She's been stealing from guests all evening." The sergeant moved toward Heather's table. "Miss, I need you to stand up," and then he saw Aisha. His steps faltered. His partner, younger and less experienced, kept moving until the sergeant grabbed his arm. "Cole," the sergeant said, his voice suddenly uncertain. Aisha stood slowly, deliberately, and reached into her leather bag. She set her Department of Justice Special Counsel identification on the table where both officers could see it clearly. "Sergeant Morrison," she said calmly, reading his nameplate. "I'm Special Counsel Aisha Cole, DOJ Elder Abuse Task Force. Before you proceed, you should know you're in the middle of a federal investigation." Heather watched the color drain from Sergeant Morrison's face. It was like watching dominoes fall, the recognition, the reassessment, the sudden shift from aggression to careful professionalism. "Ma'am," Morrison said to Aisha, his tone completely transformed. "We received a call about theft in progress." "You received a planted call," Aisha corrected. She gestured to Heather's table. "This young woman is a material witness in a guardianship fraud case involving forged medical directives and elder exploitation. That sketchbook contains documented evidence, spanning 3 weeks." Morrison's partner had already activated his body camera. Heather could see the small red light blinking, recording everything: Bram's stunned expression, Harold Vance's mounting panic, Elias Morrow edging toward the service corridor. The call came from... Morrison checked his phone, then looked up sharply. A burner number, routed through 3 relay towers. "Professional setup," Aisha noted. "Antoine." The maitre d' appeared with another tablet. "The call was placed from our service corridor approximately 23 minutes ago. I have camera footage." He turned the screen toward the officers. Heather couldn't see the video, but she watched Morrison's expression harden as he recognized someone. "That's the man who just went into the kitchen," the younger officer said, pointing. "One of Mr. Garrison's associates," Antoine confirmed. "Shall I have him detained?" "Yes," Morrison said, his voice clipped. Then, turning to Bram, "Sir, I'm going to need you to remain here while we sort this out." Bram's confidence had evaporated. "This is ridiculous. I'm the one who called you. To file a false report interfering with a federal investigation," Aisha finished. "Sergeant, I'd like those body cameras rolling continuously. And, Miss Fuller," she turned to Heather, "I'll need digital copies of every sketch in that book, with timestamps." Stephen was already moving, phone out. "Marco's sending them to your secure server now. Full chain of custody, every page photographed and logged." Heather clutched her sketchbook, hardly believing what was happening. 3 weeks ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was evidence. Vance made a small sound, almost a whimper, as he realized his carefully constructed fraud was collapsing in real time, recorded on police body cameras, witnessed by a room full of Chicago's elite. Then Elias Morrow bolted. He moved fast, breaking for the service corridor with the practiced speed of someone who'd run before. His hand hit the door handle.
Locked.
Antoine stood 20 feet away, a small remote in his palm, his expression pleasantly neutral. Elias spun back toward the dining room and froze. Every phone was out. Dozens of them, held by diners who'd just watched a federal attorney dismantle a criminal conspiracy over dessert. The cameras pointed at him like accusatory fingers, recording his face, his panic, his guilt. He was trapped in a gallery of witnesses, and every second was being documented. "Mr. Morrow," Aisha said quietly, "I've been looking for you for 6 months. Thank you for making this easy." Morrison's partner moved forward with handcuffs. And in that moment, Heather understood. The freeze wasn't just happening here. It would echo everywhere these men had operated. Every forged directive, every stolen asset, every senior citizen stripped of their autonomy. The room had frozen. But soon, an entire criminal network would follow. Heather watched the handcuffs click around Bram Garrison's wrists with a sense of unreality that made the chandeliers seem to shimmer and blur. "You're making a mistake," Bram said, his voice tight with barely contained rage as Sergeant Morrison guided him toward the exit. "Stephen, tell them." "I'm telling them nothing." Stephen's voice was quiet, final. "You tried to strip my mother of everything she built. You used her accident as an opportunity. There's nothing more to say." Harold Vance went next, his expensive suit looking suddenly shabby as the younger officer read him his rights. Elias Morrow had already been escorted out through the service entrance, away from the phones, away from the witnesses, but the damage was done. Aisha stood near the entrance, coordinating with her task force via phone. "Yes, I need warrants for the Guardianship Foundation offices, Vance and Associates, and every property listed under their senior care trust. Tonight. I have documented evidence of systematic fraud going back." She glanced at Heather's sketchbook. "At least 8 years, probably longer." The dining room had mostly emptied. The guests who'd witnessed everything were already spreading the story, in text messages, phone calls, whispered conversations that would reach boardrooms and courtrooms by morning. Stephen approached Heather slowly, hands in his pockets, his usual armor of control visibly cracked. "I need to thank you," he said. "And I need to apologize." Heather looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For thinking you were a threat. For watching you like an asset instead of—" He paused, searching for words. "My mother was right. I've spent so long trying to control everything that I forgot fear and control aren't the same thing. You weren't afraid when it mattered. That's something I'm still learning." Before Heather could respond, Karina's voice called from across the room. "Heather, come sit with me." In Karina's suite an hour later, the city lights sparkled through floor-to-ceiling windows. Heather sat on the cream sofa, sketchbook open on her lap, while Karina's wheelchair was positioned beside her. Stephen had excused himself to handle the legal aftermath, leaving them alone. "There's something you should know," Karina said softly. "About your grandmother." Heather's hands stilled. "I never knew her. My mother said she died when I was a baby."
"She did.
But before that, she was a nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital. Margaret Fuller." Karina smiled at Heather's sharp intake of breath. In 1996, she exposed a fraudulent charity ring that was funneling donations meant for patient care into private accounts. The scandal destroyed several careers. It also made her a target. What happened to her? "She died in a car accident 6 months after her testimony." Karina's voice was gentle but firm. "The official report said mechanical failure. But your mother never believed it. She spent years running from the people her mother had exposed, changing cities, changing names. She never told you because she wanted you to be free of it." Heather felt tears burning behind her eyes. "The lullaby. Your grandmother used to sing it in the pediatric ward. To calm frightened children." Karina reached for Heather's hand. "When Elias Morrow taught it to you, he had no idea he was handing you a weapon across generations. The same fight, the same predators, just wearing different names." "I don't understand why you're telling me this." "Because you have a choice." Karina's grip tightened. "You can take the payment I owe you money, a fresh start somewhere far from here, and disappear the way your mother did. Or you can stay. Not as charity. Not as someone I'm protecting." Karina's eyes were fierce and kind at once. "As family, properly defined. As someone who belongs at this table because you earned your place with courage and a sketchbook and a stubborn refusal to look away." Heather looked down at their joined hands, Karina's elegant and pale, her own stained with charcoal and marked by 3 weeks of survival. "I'd like to stay," she whispered. Karina smiled. "Then welcome home, Heather Fuller." Later, after the lawyers and the statements and the cascade of warrants that would eventually bring down a network spanning 4 states, I sat with Heather in the restaurant one last time. The chandeliers had been dimmed, the tables cleared, but we remained, her sketchbook open between us, our hands resting on pages that had stopped a coup and started a reckoning. Through the windows, I could see police cars arriving at buildings across the city, the machinery of justice grinding into motion. The freeze spreading from one dining room to 100 offices where predators had operated in plain sight. "What will you draw next?" I asked her. She smiled, tired but real. "Something beautiful. I think I've earned that." "Yes," I said. "You have." Outside, the city would spend months unraveling what we'd exposed in one evening. But inside, under softened chandeliers, a homeless girl and a paralyzed matriarch sat together, not as savior and saved, but as family. The lullaby had been passed down through generations. And this time, finally, it had come home.